Rasul Berry, thanks for being with us.
Yep,
Enjoying time with you. So you are a huge Marvel fan, like myself.
Yes.
I am. Black Panther
Yes.
is one of the more recent Marvel movies that has come out and has taken the world by storm. It actually just became the number one all-time superhero movie domestically.
Wow.
So obviously it's an important movie. What is it about Black Panther that speaks to us? What is it that it communicates?
Yeah. Well, again, my Marvel fandom, first of all, goes back to high school when I had subscriptions sent to me, and
Really?
yes, on a regular basis. So it's
another
been
level.
another level. Not Johnny Come Lately. It's
Yeah,
been there,
yeah.
So it's been really exciting to see all of these stories come to life. Black Panther has been extraordinary because one, it's just an incredible movie and just a narrative that we can all find ourselves into. But specifically, especially for those of African descent, to actually have a movie for the first time in which people that look like you, that have kind of the same story arc in terms of, just being from an African American community or Pan-African, like that, it just puts yourself in the story in a way that just felt different and felt really cool to be a part of. And to me, it really showed me just the power of story and why that's such a big deal for all of us.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a great story and it resonates. So how does the concept of story relate to what we believe when it comes to faith?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because even if superhero movies are not your thing, we all have a thing, right? Like whether it's rom-com, whether it's, sci-fi thrillers, whether it's whatever. And that thing is this embedded desire that we have to understand our world through a narrative, through an aspect of a story. And that relates very significantly to our faith because basically it speaks to what some people refer to as a worldview. It's the story that the assumptions that we come into life with in terms of how it works and what do we believe about the world in which we live in. What is its, beginning, middle and end, and where do we fit and find ourselves in it? That's something that we're all exploring and trying to discover as we move through life.
Yeah. So tell us about worldviews.
Yes. Yep. So it's interesting. Ravi Zacharias, who's an author and a great Christian thinker, he mentions that there's 4 essential elements that what we say a worldview has. Okay. One is origin, which answers the question, where do we come from? Mm-hmm. The second is morality, which answers the question, what's wrong with the world and, what should I do? How should I live? The third is the question of purpose. What am I here for? What is the point to all of this? And the fourth is the question of destiny. What happens when we die? What is ultimate reality? And every worldview seeks to answer and tries to answer those basic questions. There are 5, people organize them differently. There's essentially 5 major worldviews, you could say. There's a natural materialistic worldview, which is the prominent one in the U.S. in a lot of ways, which is basically you find people just say all that exists is what I see around me. Mm-hmm. There's no just the natural world, whatever is evident by science, that's all that exists. In that worldview, people say we just got here, like there was no purpose, there's no point. Morality, well, we kind of just have a pragmatic whatever works to kind of help the maximum amount of people thrive. And then as far as, purpose, you kind of get to choose whatever that is. And then destiny or what happens when we die, they would say nothing. So that's an example. That's naturalism. There's also pantheism, which is more your Eastern philosophies. There's spiritism, which is more of like what you would see in like animism or like even Wiccan and things like that, where there's like these competing spirits, and it's about how do I appease some spirits and and avoid the others. And then there's postmodernism, which is kind of the newest one on the block that actually says we can't know absolute reality. And so as a result of that, you can kind of just pick and choose like a buffet style, whatever you want to how to define things. And then lastly, there's theism, which is the idea that there's a God who created us and who desires to have a relationship with us and all of those things, which especially with Christianity would fall into. But it's really helpful to understand when we look to engage in conversations and even just to process life from our own standpoint, that everybody has a worldview. And we all have assumptions and beliefs that can't necessarily be proven, but that interpret the way we look at the world.
Yeah. So why are worldviews important?
Yeah, world is important for us to know that we come into life and our experiences with assumptions and presuppositions, because it's almost like trying to tell a fish that water is wet, right? Like when it's all surrounded, it's just,
Right.
what is wetness? What is water?
Yeah.
And I find this especially important when I'm trying to, share the reasons for why I believe, what I believe with other people, because the assumptions of naturalism right now are so just rooted in the way that a lot of us are trained to think, that people don't even recognize that they have them. Like, it's just kind of like, yeah, of course we've evolved from science, and so as a result we don't believe anymore. And it's like, well, that's not actually a necessary assumption. That's just what you're coming into as a result of kind of some things that you've chosen to believe. And I find that that's helpful for us to understand. And also it's important because different worldviews conform to reality more than others, right? And so we can have a certain story that we're telling ourselves, but that story is not necessarily true. And so it's helpful to also be able to say, okay, my assumption that I'm making about this world and this life, is it really true? Or which one conforms the most to reality? And that's where it's also important to even be aware of these things, so that you know and you can test what it is that that we believe and why.
Yeah. What are some of the problems with some of these worldviews? I mean, some of them are obvious when we look at them from a Christian standpoint. What are some of the problems that you see?
Well, I'll just kind of look at two that are kind of very prominent, right? So I mentioned naturalism. So the idea that we just happened, or things just kind of were just through an accident, a cosmic accident, things collided. Well, that immediately begs the question of morality. So because most people who hold to that view are pragmatists, they don't really embrace the full bore of what that means. That means there really isn't an absolute basis for morality. It also means that purpose is really just an illusion of what you just decide to do. And all of these things, it's funny, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche was, he called out atheists for trying to hold on to morality. He actually said, look, if God is dead, then morality is dead too.
Yeah.
And so you can't have it both ways. So there's a sense in which there's a breakdown there. Postmodernism, well, what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. And, they can be different. And it's like, and the one thing that's usually the problem there is no absolute truth. And people get offended that when Christians say, well, I believe that my truth is not just true for me, but true for everyone. And so the next time someone says, well, there is no absolute truth, you can say, are you absolutely sure?
Yeah.
It's kind of a self-refuting statement, an argument, because it is a claim about absolute reality. Right. So those are some problems that emerge that are important for us to know as the backdrop for many of the people that we talk to, and that even can seep into our own perspectives on things as well.
Yeah. But people don't even realize that they're saying it half the time.
Fish and water.
Yeah, exactly. So what's better about the story recorded in the Bible?
Well, this is where it gets exciting, because especially for someone like me who was more of a naturalist, kind of growing up, and was coming more from a secular standpoint.
Okay.
Yeah. Up until I was a senior in high school, and for like my freshman year in college, I was like, oh, religion, that's just something that people, believe in because they need a crutch. Like, that was my standpoint.
Okay.
And essentially it came from this core of morality that I just thought I was good enough, whatever good enough was, and I could make decisions. I could be good without God. And circumstances happened that made it very clear. No, that actually, I didn't even live up to my own standards,
right.
let alone some divine standard of truth. So what happened in my own world was that my worldview was exposed as being flawed. Now, when I started to explore Christianity and I started to explore the Bible, I was blown away with one, how much it conformed to the reality that I understood, and then two, how beautiful it was. It was both. So this idea that origin, where do we come from? That God created us. He created us, out of a sense of love and a desire for relationship. But then two, what's wrong with the world? Morality. It says that, well, when humanity rebelled against God and chose to do its own thing, then that's where the separation occurred, which is why we can have this mixture, this crazy mixture of seeing, incredible beauty, but also seeing incredible violence in the same place. Like when people ask, well, how do, bad things happen? And it's like, well, because God has given us this sense of choice and being able to choose things. And because we have this corruption inside of us, we sometimes choose very bad things. And then there are other times that we choose very good things. But it answers that question. But then three, like what hope do I have? And, what's my purpose? And that's the amazing thing, that the Christian story is that God did not just see us and leave us in that state of corruption, but that he came into the story and that he lived among us to demonstrate for us how to live in the person of Jesus Christ. And that ultimately he substituted himself for our sins. He died and actually paid the ultimate price, so that we could have relationship with him, not based on how good we are, but based on how good he was, and that relationship could be restored. And then the fourth point of destiny is really gets exciting. What happens when we die is that we can have and experience eternity with God. And in the meantime, what we're supposed to be doing is being advocates and kingdom builders representing a kingdom that is to come. And so every day when I wake up now, there's a sense of purpose, because I recognize that I am not just here for me, but that there's a bigger, better story that God is telling in any life. Oh, and this is the last part, redemption. In the Christian story, there's a sense of, regardless of what's happened in my life, no matter the most painful, the worst circumstance that has ever happened to me, I can have confidence that God can redeem and somehow work out to my good, because he took the worst thing that ever happened in the cross and made it work out to our good. And that symmetry is compelling. It feels true to me, but it also is beautiful, and it makes sense. And those things allow me to interject myself in the story that I'm like, man, it's the greatest story ever told, and it's a true story.
And it involves us.
And it involves us,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so give us kind of this concluding thought. What is this story, in light of it? What does it say of us?
Yeah. Well, I think what it says is that we are complex. That there's this mixture. We have goodness in us because we're made in the image of God. The Bible tells us, and yet it also says that we have darkness in us because we are broken. And that both of those two realities rest inside of us, and the only way they can be reconciled is when we offer those things back to the one who made us, and he can piece it together. The Bible gives this imagery of God as the potter and we are the clay, and it's like these different shards of clay that are just kind of broken. It's like he can put those and mend those back together again to completely restore them, and that to me is where we fit. But then it doesn't end there, because then he says he sends us out to go and be the ones to heal the world.
That's what we do.
That's what we do
yeah.
in response. That's the expression of what it means for us to be in connection to and in congruence with that story that he's telling, in harmony with that story, is that we get to be an expression of that on earth that is in heaven. So I have this perspective where I'm not perfect, I'm flawed, but I'm not irredeemable either. That I can still be restored, and that's a daily. That's true of me in the big picture, but it's also true in me every time I wake up. I have to make a choice of which aspect am I going to respond more into the light or to the darkness.
Yeah. Russell, this has been really helpful for me personally. I know it's been helpful for our students as well. Thank you for shedding light on some of these things and framing it in the context of the gospel. It really helps in many, many ways. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.